Chris Kreider played with a ton of injuries all season, but why did the Rangers let him? Plus, should Chris Drury have been fired along with Peter Laviolette?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1296 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Schick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Rangers on Monday went through the annual tradition, breakup day. That's the nickname that's sort of been bestowed upon it over the past couple of years here. And essentially, it's just what it sounds like. The Rangers meet with the media for one final time, and then obviously they're on their way to do whatever it is that they do in the offseason. But there were a ton of things going on there, a ton of interesting comments from various players, and so much so that this has to be part one of a two-parter. There's no way I can stuff everything into this one episode. But for me, one of the biggest talking points to come out of this whole thing, and I think a lot of you would probably agree, the revelation that Chris Kreider played injured all season. Now, on one hand, we sort of knew that. We knew about the bad back and the fact that, seemed to flare up at certain times and then go away at other times. The Rangers do tend to be about as secret as they can when it comes to their players' injuries. But what we didn't know is Kreider basically had a whole laundry list of injuries, many of which essentially overlapped with each other. Again, we knew about the back. Apparently, per Kreider, on breakup day, once his back started to feel a little better, he also suffered a left hand injury. This is the game that the Rangers played coming out of the Four Nations break. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the score was 7-2 Buffalo when it happened. And it was late in the third period. So to kind of just rub salt in the wound there, it happened at a time that was essentially garbage time. There's no way the Rangers were going to come back and win that game. But he suffered the injury there, missed some time because of it. And now surgery is apparently a possibility to obviously fix that hand, the injury that he suffered, coming out of the Four Nations break there. Additionally, Chris Kreider, we're not done. Additionally, Chris Kreider was also dealing with vertigo. He described it as a weird illness that went into my inner ear and caused vertigo. And this started to essentially plague him coming out of the Christmas break. So that's a lot. As far as the question of why Kreider continued to play through all this, I kind of already know the answer. I proposed that question at the top of the show here, but the best answer I can give is that he's a hockey player and this is what they do. They play through all kinds of pain, all sorts of ailments. And I feel like in the case of Kreider, and I don't know this 100%, but as far as trying to play through the back injury and trying to play through the vertigo and trying to play through the hand injury that he suffered after the Four Nations, I feel like a good amount of it, first of all, is just pride. There's that to be considered for sure. But also the fact that at best, for the vast majority of this season, the Rangers were a fringe playoff team, and they actually spent more than half the season on the outside of the playoff picture looking in. So I get the feeling whatever chance there was that Kreider would, take himself out of the lineup, miss a significant amount of time, that whatever chance there was of that happening, it very likely lessened due to what I just mentioned, where the Rangers were in the standings and the fact that, points and wins are so precious, and they went through that miserable stretch in December. He probably wanted to stay out there and try to help them get out of it. The problem is that, whether it's injuries or whether it's, the lack of effort that plagued the entire team, Kreider just wasn't himself. I mean, does anyone really think that he was this past season? Now, on one hand, it's admirable that Chris Kreider did this. It's admirable anytime a hockey player does this. They play through illness. They play through injury, whatever it might be. A bunch of them, I'm sure, are doing it right now with the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it's also admirable. I know some people have already pointed this out, that suffering from all these ailments and all these injuries and I guess a sickness, he was still able to pot 22 goals on the season, and props to him for being able to do that. On the other hand, though, watching Chris Kreider this season, it was painful because he clearly was just not himself for the whole myriad of reasons that we just went over. So the question becomes, why did the Rangers allow him to do this? We're looking at a situation here where the Rangers just allowed Kreider to go back out there and go back out there and go back out there. And very clearly he was compromised. And I realize you don't want to lose somebody that you're counting on to be one of your best players. But at a certain point, you got to take one step back to take many steps forward. At a certain point, take him out of the lineup, hope that, the back injury goes away. The vertigo, I mean, look, I'm not a doctor. That's a very well-established fact on this podcast. But, I mean, clearly these things were messing with him, right? There had to always be some explanation why we saw just such a watered-down, lackluster version of Chris Kreider this season. And, again, I'm not completely excusing his play, but for the entire season, before the vertigo, before the hand injury for sure. But something was amiss all season, and we now know what it was. And I feel like the Rangers need to answer for this. Sometimes you got to save these guys from themselves. Kreider wants to play through everything. Great. Again, it's very admirable that he would gut it out like that. Good for him. Good for any player that does that. But at a certain point, when they're playing the brand of hockey that they're playing due to the injuries that they have, you got to step in there and make the call for them and take them out of the lineup and make the best of a bad situation, especially when you've got guys waiting in the wings like Brett Berard, like Brian Hoffman, even like Gabe Perreault at the very tail end of the season. Make the best of a bad situation, plug one of those guys into a prominent spot in the lineup, hope that it sparks your comatose team, and take it from there. Let Kreider hopefully get better and come back, refreshed and a better version of himself than what we got this entire season. So really inexplicable that the Rangers didn't step in there, or at least did not do so long before they did at some point. Because like I said, it was rough watching Kreider this season. And I think we now know, we kind of all knew along about the back injury and how that could be somewhat contributing to what we're seeing from Kreider. But, you look at this laundry list of injuries here, and it's a miracle he played through everything that he did. And again, props to him for doing it. But at a certain point, the Rangers owe it to their guy to step in there for him and make the call and take him out of the lineup, at least for a couple of games, in the hopes that things get better. So in just a second, we're going to keep everything going. We're going to keep talking about Chris Kreider here and, everything that he went through this season, and the Rangers failing essentially to act and make a difficult decision to take him out of the lineup when they probably should have done that. We'll get to that. We'll also get to Chris Drury and some of the comments that he made and kind of open up this debate as to whether or not Drury should even still be the Ranger general manager. That's how we'll conclude today's episode. But like I said, in just a second, a little bit more about the Chris Kreider situation, and we'll get to that in just a minute. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you will get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, let's go keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. A huge shout out to the everydayers as always for sticking with this podcast through thick and thin, through what was obviously a very difficult Ranger season, and now into the Ranger off season and the Stanley Cup playoffs as well. And for the everydayers, we're just scratching the surface here. It's going to be at least a two-parter talking about everything that was discussed and all the little tidbits that came out of the Rangers exit day, the breakup day there. And we're doing that today, and we're going to do more of that in the next episode. For sure, including some comments from Mika Zibanejad, some comments from K'Andre Miller, to other Rangers who are facing uncertain futures with this team. And of course, everybody's favorite Ranger, Calvin DeHaan, he spoke again, so we'll get to that as well. But what I want to do right now, like I said, is keep the focus here on Chris Kreider. The Rangers did eventually take him out of the lineup, but by then I feel like it was too little too late. And at this point, he's already dealing with a bad back. He's already dealing with vertigo. So they're going to let him play through the bad back, on and on and on. They're going to let him play through vertigo, on and on and on. He finally gets the hand injury. Honestly, thinking about the pain that his back must have been in and dealing with vertigo, I've never had vertigo, but I've heard that it's absolutely miserable. Essentially, again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to give a professional diagnosis here, but essentially, the room is like upside down and you're just dizzy all the time. I can't even imagine that. So they make him play through that, or at least allow him to play through that. And then the hand injury happens. That might have honestly been like a mercy kind of a situation where, okay, they're finally going to take him out of the lineup. I guess by the point that presumably he probably couldn't even grip his stick at that point, maybe at that was finally the breaking point for the Rangers, and that's why they took him out. So again, they eventually did take him out of the lineup, but it was coming out of the Four Nations. He had this laundry list of injuries, and as I mentioned a second ago, that's a whole nother subplot in and of itself, because we're trying to figure out all season what's wrong with the Rangers, and we're trying to figure out all season specifically what's wrong with Chris Kreider and what is going on here, and why does he just look like a complete shell of himself. And we now know at least some of those answers to those questions. But he played in the Four Nations. The Rangers allowed him to play in the Four Nations. And going into that tournament, I mentioned it multiple times on this podcast that, okay, the back injury, that's the only thing that we knew about at the time with Kreider, as far as like what's ailing him and what might be slowing him down a little bit. So I said that's going to be a great gauge of where Kreider is and how bad that back injury really is right now and how much that is slowing him down. Because in my mind, if Kreider really has this horrible, debilitating back injury and he's in constant pain and it's, massively affecting his play, then okay, if that's the case, clearly he's not going to play in this Four Nations. And even if he wants to, the Rangers will step in there and they'll prevent it from happening. Now, the Four Nations was awesome. I know these guys love representing their country. I'm sure Chris Kreider is no exception to that rule. But again, it goes back to something I mentioned just a minute ago. Sometimes these teams have to step in there and save these guys from themselves. In a way, that Four Nations break could have been a blessing in disguise for the Rangers and for Chris Kreider because, okay, listen, we can't have you playing this. You're banged up. You got the vertigo. You got the back injury. The most important thing right now is for you to take advantage of this 2-week break. I think it was exactly 2 weeks between Ranger games to accommodate, obviously, the Four Nations face-off. And they didn't do that. They just set him right there along with everybody else. And he only ended up playing in 2 of the 4 games. It was the last 2 games. But still, I mean, he's there. He's still doing hockey activities. He's getting into these high-pressure, high-intensity, hard-hitting games, these nasty games. I mean, the United States versus Canada games, that was appointment television. But you got to save this guy from himself. You got to let him take his foot off the gas a little bit and rest up and hope that, I mean, I don't know. Could that have helped Kreider? Could that have helped the back injury? Could that have helped with the vertigo? The vertigo one in particular, I have no idea. I don't know how that works. It seems like something that can kind of come and go. And the little I know about it, it does sound like that is indeed the case, that vertigo can be here one day and gone the next. And again, not a doctor, but that's my very general understanding of it. But they let him play in that Four Nations tournament. And on top of that, something that happened earlier, even earlier than the Four Nations in the season, the Rangers made Kreider a healthy scratch. And at the time, I was completely on board with it because they just weren't getting anything from Kreider. They weren't getting anything from Mika Zibanejad. They weren't getting anything from a lot of their star players, guys that this team really depends upon to lead the way, produce offensively, and just be the better players, better all-around players on the team. The excuse was right there. They could have just taken Kreider out of the lineup and not designated him as a healthy scratch. By that point, he was at least dealing with the back injury. I think at that point, he had the vertigo too. And you designate him as a healthy scratch. And again, without all this information, without us knowing about the vertigo, without us knowing about his bad back, I said, yeah, I mean, go ahead. Let him be a healthy scratch. I had been campaigning for a couple of weeks for Mika Zibanejad to be a healthy scratch, and you could have made a case for that too. It ends up being Chris Kreider. But again, he's got all these injuries. Why would you frame it that way? Why would you not just say you're taking him out of the lineup because he's hurt and he's sick? It wouldn't have even been a lie. It would have been the God's honest truth. So I didn't really get that either. I got it at the time because at the time it looked like he just wasn't giving any real effort. I mean, you could say that about a lot of players on this Ranger team. But now looking back at it, yeah, well, he was dealing with all this stuff too. I still think Kreider in some ways could have stepped up in a better way this season as a Ranger leader than he did. But in this particular case here, the fact that he was injured, the fact that he was sick, you should just let everybody know that. Why go with the healthy scratch designation? Just doesn't make any sense. And I mentioned this earlier too, but if he's got to miss some time, again, you throw an Othman or you throw a Berard into a more prominent role. Gabe Perreault obviously wasn't available at that time. He was still playing in college, but could have made the best out of a bad situation. Obviously, the Rangers chose not to do that. But at the very least, and a couple of you guys have made this point as well, How are you not going to sit down Chris Kreider at the end of this season when it became very, very obvious that this Ranger team had nothing left? They had nothing left in the tank. They weren't going to, pull it together and go on some miraculous run at the end of the season and fight their way into the playoffs. It wasn't going to happen. And even if you were looking for that to happen, the best option probably would have been with Chris Kreider not being in the lineup, given his obvious complete laundry list of injuries and ailments that he was dealing with. And I know, the last couple of games there against Florida and against Tampa, he did get a couple of goals and whatnot, a couple of assists in that stretch as well. But you're done. The Rangers aren't going anywhere. And you've got Gabe Perreault, who gets here from college, being a healthy scratch in 4 of the 8 games that he plays with the Rangers. Gabe Perreault is somebody that could really use those games. And if it's not Gabe Perreault as a healthy scratch, it's Brandon Othman. And if it's not Othman, it's Brett Berard. Just take Kreider out of the lineup, man. Again, save him from himself. He's got a situation now where he needs surgery, or at least there's a possibility that he's going to need surgery. You're throwing him out there in meaningless games at the end of the season. Now, again, it's entirely possible that he convinced the Rangers, hey, I'm good. I can do this. I'm ready to go. I want to be out there till the end and all this stuff. And maybe he lobbied for that. But again, to repeat what I said earlier, you got to step in. It's your responsibility to make this call for the players sometimes and save them from themselves. The games are meaningless. The last 2 games, completely meaningless. The Rangers couldn't possibly make the playoffs at that point. So why is he in the lineup? Doesn't make any sense. But then again, not a whole lot that this Ranger team does makes a whole lot of sense recently. Kreider was asked, all this information is coming from breakup day. The season's over. The media, the beat reporters and whatnot, they all talk to these players about the season that just happened and what lies ahead for themselves, for the team as a whole. Kreider did talk about his future with the Rangers on breakup day. And this is a quote from Kreider on that day. I'll read the whole thing here. It's not too long. He was asked about, possibly staying with this team and what the future holds. He says, "This is home for me. This is the organization that gave me an opportunity to live out my dream. This is where I want to be. And this is the group that I want to help in whatever fashion win hockey games. I've developed so many incredible relationships and grown up and spent so much time in the area. So obviously this is where I want to be. And this is the group that I want to help in whatever fashion win hockey games." Now, on one hand, he's not going to go up there and say, "Oh my God, this is terrible. Get me out of here. Trade me. I want to leave right now." Nobody's going to say that. But he also, he went pretty all in here on saying that he wants to be here for the foreseeable future. And that's something that I've said multiple times. I could never get a feel on Chris Kreider and where his head was at, during the season. He wasn't all that available for interviews down the stretch this season, after the memo and whatnot. But even with that being the case, I had no idea. I had no idea if he wanted to stay or not. If he was in a situation now where he wasn't so sure that he wanted to stay, he wouldn't have to say as much as he did here. He really put over the organization and how much it means, calls it his home and all that stuff. That sounds like somebody that doesn't want to go anywhere. I still think it's probably time. I think moving on is probably best for all parties. But be that as it may, it might be out of his hands. It clearly is out of his hands because he's only got that partial no move clause. And so we'll see. The other subplot that develops out of all this is that, we're not sure that teams would be lining up to trade for Kreider anyway. I think he's still movable if the Rangers really want to get it done. But now it's come to light that he's dealing with vertigo and he's got all these injuries and he might need surgery. So that makes any potential deal that much more difficult. But the Rangers really dropped the ball here. The Rangers dropped the ball all season in so many different ways. The front office, the coaches, the players, the list goes on and on. But to keep throwing him out there and never even try when he's dealing with vertigo and a bad back that clearly slowed him down this season, to never even pull him out of the lineup, they just never tried it. Maybe he could have gotten better if he sat for a few games. We'll never know now. But in just a minute, we're going to keep everything going. Want to shift our attention to Chris Drury and basically just debate whether he should have been fired right along with Peter Laviolette and talk about what the future might hold for Drury with the New York Rangers. And, if this is essentially a make or break season coming up for him. Spoiler alert, it is. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, You can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Shifting our attention now to Chris Drury, who nothing official yet, but I think it's pretty obvious at this point that Drury's going to be back for at least one more season as the Rangers general manager. This whole situation, everything that's gone on with the Rangers this past season, the fact that Peter Laviolette got fired, it begs the question of whether or not Chris Drury should have been fired. And just to be clear here, we're not debating will he be fired. I think at this point, like I said, the writing is on the wall. The fact that he was even doing all these interviews right after Peter Laviolette gets fired, that pretty much says that he's coming back next season. I would put it at least 95% that he'll be back for, at least the start of this upcoming season. I mean, I guess never say never, but it feels like he will be back. He's probably safe, I would say, for at least the entirety of next season. But should he have been fired? I tend to favor when you fire a head coach, a lot of times the GM goes right along with it. And as many people have pointed out, he's now going to be hiring his third head coach in the last 4 years. Or at least he's going to have his third head coach in the last 4 years. Because, Gallant wasn't hired in year 2, but he was there in year 2. Then you get 2 years of Peter Laviolette. And now you're going to get the first year of whoever ends up being the next head coach of the New York Rangers. So, yeah, 3 coaches in 4 years. And it feels like, whoever the head coach is, he's always on the hot seat. There's always a debate about if he's going to get fired, should he get fired, who should replace him, all that stuff. And now you're in a situation where, Chris Drury gets to keep his job, even though Peter Laviolette doesn't get to keep his, even though Gerard Gallant didn't get to keep his, even though, David Quinn didn't get to keep his either. Chris Drury, by every possible indication, is going to be back with this team for this upcoming season. And part of the reason that I would prefer the Rangers moving on from Chris Drury is it goes back to something that I talked about in our last episode. We were discussing, Peter Laviolette and everything that went wrong and the fact that he's fired. And I talked about how the new head coach should be given free rein to essentially do whatever he wants. That individual should be able to put together their own coaching staff and all that good stuff. It's kind of the same thing when it comes to a general manager, because here's a hypothetical that I want to throw at you guys. Okay, Drury keeps his job for this upcoming season. He hires whoever he's going to hire. And again, we'll debate that in future episodes, who should be the next head coach. But Drury hires a new coach. Rangers have another bad season, or at least subpar season. They either miss the playoffs or make the playoffs, but get knocked out very quickly, like in the first round. And that cost Chris Drury his job. Well, now what do you do? Because now you've got a head coach who just got here. He just completed his first season with the New York Rangers. I don't think you're going to be looking to fire the head coach after 1 year. But Drury, I think, is going to be on the hot seat going into this upcoming season. So you could be in a situation at the end of that hypothetical season that I just described there, the Rangers missing the playoffs or not making any noise in the playoffs at least, where Drury gets fired. Now you're going to hire a new general manager. Does this new GM, is this individual now forced to use the head coach that just completed his first season here? I mean, I guess that could work. But again, when somebody gets hired, I'm a big believer in letting them do the job the way that they want to do it. And if you hire a new general manager and this individual is forced to roll with the head coach that you just hired the year before, that's not really an ideal situation, I don't think. Now, one way that it could work is if you bring in a general manager who maybe has some prior history with the head coach and they get along good and they've worked together before and have had some success before. But I mean, there's no guarantees that you'll be in a situation like that. So I don't know. It's just kind of a weird situation. I feel like the Rangers are kind of caught in between if that's the way it unfolds. Now, if the Rangers are good next season, then the problem takes care of itself because that buys Drury another year, buys a head coach another year, and hopefully you move forward. But there's no guarantees that the Rangers are going to have a successful season next year. We'll see how it goes. Drury was asked about the Ranger player frustration and whether communication needs to be improved. And this is what he said about that whole thing. We're going to look at every single aspect of this. Certainly, I'm always critical of myself and trying to find ways to be better. It starts with me, and I will continue to do that. As far as players, and we've had a few this year talk about ice time or scratches, we certainly want players here who want to play. We don't want players who are happy being scratched. I know for a fact that Lavi is really big on communication and communicated with players throughout his 2 years here about where they stood. So, I mean, it's really just a bunch of GM talk. I mean, it's nice to hear him at least, in this scrum here, or whatever you want to call it, take some accountability. But I'm not the first person to point out the irony going on here. He talks about how it starts with him, and yet, again, Peter Laviolette's the one that gets fired. Phil Housley, too, if you want to throw him in there, talking about accountability, and Drury gets to keep his job. To say nothing of all the Ranger players that Drury traded away during the middle of what was an absolutely chaotic season here, and did so to, I would say, middling results at best. I mean, I know they got some draft picks out of some of the trades, that we won't know how those draft picks turn out for at least a couple of years here. But yeah, I mean, I don't really look at anything that Drury did. I mean, some moves had to be made. He probably got to the point with Trouba where he had to be moved. And, the Borgen trade, I think, is good. Maybe a little bit overpaid, maybe a little bit too long of a contract that Drury gave out to him. I mean, I like Borgen overall. But did anything that Drury did really resonate with you guys? Man, he knocked it out of the park. Did any of the moves that he made, really, do they really, really look good? Do you really feel good about them going into next season? We're talking about the trades. We're talking about the Igor extension. I mean, I still feel pretty good about that. And the Lafreniere extension as well. I mean, that one could go obviously either way. But, we'll see how it goes. Drury was also asked about Gabe Perreault being healthy scratch at the end of the season. I thought this was interesting, too. He kind of defended that entire line of thinking there. I know for a fact that Lavi is really big on communication and communicated with players throughout his 2 years here about where they stood, why they were out, or why they were in, or what their role was or wasn't. So again, it's more GM speak. I mean, the one thing that I'll also say about Drury, the thing that kind of makes me nervous going forward here, I mean, to begin with, just the fact that he has not had a great run, I'd say about the last year and a half. That's a point that I've made in the past. But I also worry about him kind of overplaying his hand in this upcoming season, because let's look at another hypothetical here. First of all, you got to know that Drury, he understands the fact that the pressure is on. His seat is starting to get a little bit warm after the disaster piece of a season that this team just had. And so with that being the case, I would think Drury is fully invested in figuring out a way to make it work this year. And on one hand, that sounds good, obviously. But let's say, again, another hypothetical here. Let's say we're getting near the trade deadline next year. We're a week out, we're 2 weeks out, whatever it might be. We're getting close. And the Raiders are in a situation where they're basically a fringe playoff team. Maybe right on the line there as far as second wild card in or out, maybe tied for that last spot there. Could Drury overplay his hand in an attempt to save his own job while also sacrificing the future? We know he likes trading those second-round draft picks. I mean, those are going to be flying off the table for the Rangers to bring in, rental players or whatever it might be. He might trade first-round draft picks. He might trade prospects to do whatever he has to do to ensure that the Rangers at least make the playoffs. And then maybe they do make the playoffs, but maybe you're in a spot at that point where, okay, you're in, but you're not really thought of as one of the top contending teams. Nobody really looks at you as a serious Stanley Cup contender. And now you just trade away, draft picks, prospects, whatever it might be, just so that Drury can save his job. And I'm not criticizing Drury necessarily for this. I mean, I guess in a way I am. It's not exclusive to Drury, though. NHL general managers, they're not really thinking about 7 years down the road, 8 years down the road, 9 years down the road, probably not even 4 or 5 years down the road, because it's a short shelf life. They can't really assume that they're going to be here that long, especially if there are no Stanley Cups mixed in there. I mean, that'll buy you a little bit more time. But, I mean, Drury, he's got some tough decisions to make. But I think that he's going to certainly prioritize this next season over any seasons to come after that. And that could be to the detriment of the Rangers. Because, again, he might really, really invest in the season more so than he should. And maybe buys when he should be selling to save his own job, save his own skin. We'll see how it goes. He did have a quote about his job security. He was asked about that, his job security or potentially lack thereof. And this is what he had to say about it. I'm not going to get into personal, private conversations I have with Mr. D. I can tell you my focus is on doing what I think is right to make this organization better. We're obviously all frustrated and disappointed with how things ended and not being in the playoffs. Again, it's GM speak. It's hard to really get a whole lot out of that other than maybe the casual Mr. D there, calling James Dolan Mr. D. the fact that he called him that, like in and of itself, completely convinces me that he's certainly going to be here for this next upcoming season. As far as like, should he have been fired? I would say probably yes. If you're going to fire the coach, then I just feel like a lot of times it should be a package deal and they should all go out the door together. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. Obviously, when Gallant was fired, Drury did not go with Gallant. Drury was able to hire, Peter Laviolette for these past 2 seasons. And then there's times where it is kind of a package deal. We saw Jeff Gorton and JD get fired in the middle of a season, toward the end of a season. They let Quinn finish that season, but the writing was on the wall. Everybody knew that he wasn't coming back, and that is the exact scenario that played out. So again, you're kind of in this weird like in-between area where you keep the GM, but you fire the coach, and then next offseason, if things go bad again, the opposite might happen. You keep the coach, but you fire the GM, and you get into this situation where nobody's really in lockstep, and it's just not really an ideal situation. So we might be looking at that exact scenario. I mean, hopefully the Rangers are a heck of a lot better next season and they get into the playoffs and they have a season that we can all be proud of and the season that they can be proud of. They get the right coach. He pushes the right buttons. He motivates these guys. They go on a deep run. Crazier things have happened. I don't think too many people had the Washington Capitals, for example, with the best record in the Eastern Conference this season, but that's exactly where we're at. So can they retool on the fly? It's possible. And they're going to have to if Chris Drury is to save his job. So we will certainly discuss this going forward and talk about more about breakup day in the next episode. That will do it for today, though, guys. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.